Hey guys, welcome to the webinar here on Token Theft. I'm going to get started just in a minute here. I'm just going to give everybody just a minute or two to pop in. We had a good amount of people register, so I want to give everybody at least a chance to pop over from their past meeting here and hop in, but appreciate you guys hopping in with us today. All right, guys, we've got a good crowd here, and I've got a lot to cover, so I'm going to go ahead and kick things off. This is recorded, so we will be sending out the recording after as well, too, so don't feel like you need to take a bunch of screenshots or notes as I'm walking through this. Rather you guys spend the time, engaging with the content and everything like that. But appreciate again everybody joining here, and excited to walk you guys through this token theft webinar that I titled "Disrupt the Kill Chain." A lot of what we're going to be focusing in on today is the proactive posture management to go ahead and mitigate this type of attack, but also the subsequent attack kill chain that usually revolves around some type of business email compromise. But there's a lot to cover here today. So again, I'll be supplementing a lot of this with information that you guys can leverage as well too. So don't feel too overwhelmed as we're walking through, this various portions of this. But for those of you that don't know me, many of you probably do who joined the webinar here today though. But my name is Nick Ross. I'm a Microsoft MVP, specializing in M365, Biz Apps, and Copilot. And I'm also the CEO of CloudCapsule, which is an automated Microsoft assessment tool that we have built and have a growing team out here in Denver, Colorado. But today, we're going to walk through from an agenda perspective, understanding, really three high-level areas here, understanding the attack kill chain. So what are we talking about? We talk about token theft. There's obviously various methods that attackers can harvest tokens. And so we'll be kind of double clicking on one of the most popular ones today, which is using a workflow with adversary-in-the-middle attacks. And then we're going to talk about the proactive posture protections you could leverage to help prevent this across the kill chain. Really focusing in today on the, mitigation of the breach, the breach event itself. And then we'll have some time for some Q&A, but as we're walking through there, feel free to post any questions in the Q&A, and Dan will be moderating here and helping me out with that as well today too. This question already that Jeremy asked, can what be followed be applied to M365 BP? That's actually going to be a specific focus area that I'm going to be covering here. It's geared towards SMB and business premium users. I'll go through the breakdown because I built a license matrix that you guys will see that kind of covers what is available from a posture protection standpoint between something like business standard to business premium all the way up to E5 as an example, because I think there's been a lot of talk around, well, I need a P2 license, right, to get some of these protections. And I kind of want to demystify that to a certain degree within this webinar as well. Right. So we had around 259 registrants for this webinar, and I asked as part of the one question that you had to answer to sign up was, have you or one of your customers experienced a token theft incident in the past 12 months? 51% of you responded yes. I updated this right before we got on the call. So that's a pretty high number, obviously, that we're seeing within there. And we could have asked some follow-up questions around, the source of that token theft incident. But in most cases, what we're seeing is really the rise of the adversary-in-the-middle type of phishing attack that's leading to, the session token being harvested and replayed to get, or basically have account takeover happen within the account. And then the subsequent, actual actions that happen after that really relate to some type of, data breach, financial loss, something like that we'll cover as well here too. So a lot of this is timely. I think that's why we had a lot of, these or just high volume of people wanting to learn more about this, just because we're seeing it so much in customer environments. So when we talk about this, we talk about briefly, kind of the flow here. Many of you already know this, so I won't going to spend a lot of time on it, but effectively here, Microsoft likes to use this reference of, going to a theme park and getting a ticket from the ticket office, which represents your token, and then you can present your token, or your ticket to a ride operator, in this case, to something like Microsoft, to be able to get access within there. So that's the typical flow, obviously, of what we see. But with adversary-in-the-middle attacks, we have this capability where There's a man-in-the-middle page, which acts as this fake ticket office that is stood up here that can harvest your credentials, and I'll be showing you guys that today through EvilJinx. And this also fulfills and grabs, an MFA response, so it can actually overcome MFA, which is why it's very powerful for attackers as well too, because they basically trick the user going to this page, putting in their credentials, redirecting them to a legitimate Microsoft page where they don't know anything's really happened, and then they are able to use that token and replay it and not have to have any of those credentials to actually basically start up a session. So very powerful. We'll talk about the continuation on as well too, which is really part of the attack kill chain here that we're going to talk about from a posture management standpoint. But this is really looking at, when we have that user compromised through incidents like token theft, what is the next actions that attacker typically takes? A lot of that, is going to lead into how can I maintain persistence? And from there, there's a lot of different considerations between them registering a device, whether that's a physical device to be seen as trusted on the network, or have a new registered method for Microsoft Authenticator, right? For another MFA method to persist their activity, because they will have your passwords within there. If they were able to harvest that through the man-in-the-middle attack, they're able to register third-party applications that act as a separate identity, where they can actually exfiltrate data, send mail on behalf of users, things like that, without actually needing access to the user credentials anymore. And then largely we see as a leading indicator, they're also setting up a lot of inbox rules to mask their presence, but also to get a lot of reconnaissance going on for potentially extending their attack into other users, or discovery of new information that could tell them, hey, who's somebody who has access to change wire information, right? And trick users into sending money to a fraudulent bank account through, a supplier workflow or something like that. We see that a lot as well too. So with this, let me go ahead and switch over here. When I talk about this, we always talk about, like replicating the workflow and just seeing this as far as an incident goes. And basically, I've been able to stand up my own EvilJinx server here. And this is something that took me not very long to do, just as an FYI. And with, the droplet that I created here, this is something where I was able to stand this up within a US instance and get a US IP. And this could be done all over the world. So it's very easy to replicate, an instance where you can trick somebody, but it also will mask some of the native protections might be going on in Microsoft through IP lookups, location, geo-blocking policies you may already have in place, and things like that as well too. But within here, I've also registered a domain that's labeled as Apollo Cyber. It's a domain that I've had for a while, so it's not a net new domain that I just registered or anything like that, but you could see that going into these. But if I go and get the fake URL, here that I'm going to use as part of this attack, this is actually going to be my man-in-the-middle page in the infrastructure that uses EvilJinx, to be able to go and stand this up within the environment. So this is what an attacker will then use to put into a phishing email. And the phishing email that we see as part of these, if I go into a user's email box, can often look like this, where they're impersonating a legitimate Microsoft email. And in this case, we see that, Alan invited you to view a file. And this is a typical email we would get for OneDrive or SharePoint as an example. But if they're able to impersonate a user, or at least trick a user to think that, this is a legitimate email, they'll go ahead and click on this link here. And this is actually where, we've got that man-in-the-middle page stood up here. So they'll click it and they'll be redirected to a Microsoft login page. So this actually won't alarm the user. I'm already logged in here, so this is why that just went all the way through. Sorry. Let me go ahead and just log out here, sign out. So actually, if we look back on our EvilJinx server, let me just see. Yeah, new visitors arrived. So again, let me click on this, getting some active session here. So let me just go ahead and just straight pass through. Let me go ahead and open up this in a incognito window just so I could mimic this fully for you guys. Thanks, because I've already done this as part of the testing for viewing this as well too. So let me just go ahead and change that up. All right, so we'll be redirected here to this login page. Let me grab these test credentials I will be able to use here for this and go back. And then let me pull up the Evil Jinx server here side by side so you can see this. So in this case, I'll go ahead and grab this user to sign in here. This is actually going to be Alan that we're going to use to impersonate here. So I'll sign in with his account, and I'll go ahead and fulfill the MFA request here. And as I'm doing that, just to pop over, in this case, you can see we've already harvested the username and we already harvested the password as part of this. And then if I was to go ahead and fulfill this MFA prompt here and sign in, you'll notice that the user is going to go ahead and get redirected back, to a Microsoft web page. They went from that Apollo Cyber domain here. So they don't actually know that anything's occurred, but back in the Evil Jinx server, we've got the authorization tokens intercepted. And in this case, I can just look at my sessions and I can see that I've captured, that session from Alan in this particular case. So I can type this correctly. I can grab the cookie in this case. So I'm just going to copy this. And then as the attacker, if I just open up a VM, I'm here in an in-private window on a different machine. In this use case, I'm going to use a third-party plugin tool to go ahead and import this cookie as an example. So now I've got that set. If I go to office.com here, and I just simply click on sign in, I'm automatically redirected and I don't have to actually put anything in because of that session cookie being available. So that's the typical flow for account compromise. Again, that phishing email could be something like the OneDrive sharing of files. That's really popular because it also masks the URL pretty well. It's very well known within the organization as something that they typically see. So it's not causing any immediate alarms. If it's coming from an external user, then something like that could give them additional warnings, like external sender warnings at the top of the email. We'll walk through some of that today. But, that's how easy it is to actually go in and do. And we see other emails, that are saying, hey, click on this link to listen to this voicemail from Microsoft, and all of those other components there, that you would normally go through there. So I'm sure you guys see a lot more variance with the volume in your environments there as well too. But it's pretty crazy how easy that was to replicate as you guys are commenting on there too. But let me go ahead and pop back over now into, see if I can get this back down. Okay. So that's kind of the flow here that we're going to be starting to walk through as far as like how do we look at beginning to prevent that within these environments. And when we take a look at this, I'll share this with you guys afterwards as well too. I'm not going to be walking for the sake of time, obviously, through every single one of these protections, but what I wanted to convey here with you guys is that, number one, I've kind of mapped this to the NIST CSF framework for identify, protect, detect, recover, and respond and recover. And I've also included, the licensing considerations here that you would need to institute these types of protections. But also, this also corresponds into recover and the respond section here as well too. So as you can see, business standards get pretty weak protections across the board. You can actually respond to things, but you don't have a lot of protections. You don't have a lot of detection capability either when these types of events occur, all the way up to E5, where you get a lot more automated response, but also can put in those proactive protections, as we'll walk through today, that would actually prevent this coming all together. So it's pretty powerful. Again, I'll share this. We're not going to walk through all. We're going to probably walk through more of the top 10 today as part of this webinar for the protections. If we think about this workflow and everything that we saw there, there's a couple of different considerations, but also popping across a couple different screens here today, guys. So bear with me as I do that. If we take a look at the sign-in logs, all right, for that user that signed in, and in this case, was that user, we can notice here, like, they've had all these sign-ins from this specific IP, in this case from Greenwood Village, Colorado, and then they have this sign-in here that has a different IP address, That is from our Evil Jinx server, but it's from Broomfield, Colorado. So not a whole lot of variance in the location, but you could see through that incident that they signed in from an impossible location as an example as part of that. But this IP address is the IP address of the droplet I used to spin up the Evil Jinx server. And again, it's really easy for anybody to go get a paid subscription and set that up. So no matter where they're at in the world, they can spin up a IP address that's local in the US. So even if you have something like a geo-blocking policy, it's important that you put these other protections in place, to have this as well too. And we'll get into more of those techniques as we continue to work here, but I think this is, going to be something that, we want to pay attention to, obviously, from the investigation portion of it. So when we talk about the flow here, as far as the actual kill chain and the things that we're looking at, we obviously want to go back to this adversary in the middle concept here. And one of the first vectors you're trying to prevent is more of that email layer in this case. And again, there's multiple ways that token theft can occur. Some of the most common ways outside of this that we see is when a user is using a personal device that doesn't have our necessary protections on it. They go to some malicious web page which installs malware, and they're able to harvest a session token or a cookie that they're able to replay. So there's multiple angles, but we're focusing on the highest volume touch point today. If we think about that initial access as far as the email goes, we talk about our protections there. If I go back into Defender here for what we're looking at, we first want to protect that initial email coming through and the user kind of clicking on that link, right? Because that's really the initial attack surface there that we get. And as you'll notice, this is that same tenant where I just clicked on that link, and I've done multiple in here. We didn't get any Defender alerts. We didn't get any incidents that were created from that. Now there's an asterisk to that. This is a business premium tenant, just as an FYI. There's an asterisk that says that this is just a Contoso test tenant, right? So there's not a whole lot of telemetry going on that Microsoft can do machine learning wise to say, hey, this user is typically signing in from here. This is a weird sign in from us, but it's a Colorado, location. So I think that also limited the risk that it was assessing as part of that sign in as well too. But it is interesting that, nothing actually was picked up here within this tenant as well too. So within here, one of the first things that we want to do that you guys are likely already doing today in a lot of cases is, configuring your threat policies here for things that you would normally want to see as it relates to the protections that would just maybe prevent the malicious URL, phishing, spoofing, those types of things as well. So within your anti-spam policies here, you have some capabilities for the outbound policies and your inbound policies here that you want to take a look at and make sure you have configured as well. So in this particular case, if I take a look at this and actually not this section here, if I take a look at this particular action section, you have some considerations from the messaging for inbound spam to turn things on like zero hour auto purge, which is your ZAP protections. So if a link or phishing message is found to be known as phishing after the fact, I can zap that from that user's inbox as well as any other inbox in your organization that message might have been sent to, which is really powerful. Like if somebody reports it for phishing or if it's later detected, across the board as that. So that's one setting that you want to make sure is configured within your environment for that to, be taking effect in there. If I open up, if I go to a different section here, I go to an incident. This is one where I tested it in a different environment, and that ZAP protection, the user got that same type of an email. They clicked on this link, but then, the actual auto protections from Microsoft took into effect, and it was determined that that URL was potentially malicious, and then it zapped that email into quarantine. In this case, there was still, kind of a concern because the user had already clicked on that email and had gone to the man-in-the-middle page, but it's a use case where that protection came into play and would have done, automated investigation against other users' mailboxes within the organization. So that's why it's part of that use case there that you would want to have that within the environment. The other things that you would want to potentially do within here, we see attackers post breach, obviously, trying to initiate other campaigns to compromise other users and things like that. So you could, create sending restrictions to internal recipients or external recipients as an example, because they might also try to be, targeting supply chain types of contacts that they're using, as part of a more of a broad-based campaign. So you could restrict this. I think it's, a loose indicator. You want to be careful with that, obviously, just based off the organization. And then obviously you want to make sure things like auto forwarding are disabled. That's one-on-one protection that you'd want to have within these accounts so that users can't set up inbox rules as part of this as well too for those types of configurations. So this is, a lot of configuration here that you would initially set up for anti-spam. And then on the anti-phishing policies, you want to make sure these are configured as well too. You want to make sure you get this phishing threshold to a certain state. You want to get to a certain level of aggressiveness here without everything going to quarantine. I think that's been a tough thing to do, honestly, over the years for many of us. You want to turn on some of these features that aren't enabled by default, like impersonation protection for users. Normally, you might want to set up this for users in the organization that handle some type of wiring, or obviously executive leaders, things like that you want to have extra protection against. You want to include domains you own. You might want to include custom domains for external supply chain considerations, again, for a lot of your partners where you're wiring money a lot. And then you have some of this in mailbox intelligence, configured as well too. So a lot of that would help within here as far as all of the information that you'd be seeing within there, just to help protect against that initial email even coming through altogether. It's possible that you could redirect those types of emails right into quarantine as part of that. And then from there, you also have capabilities for setting up, safe links and safe attachments. This is all part of business premium licensing, just as a call out within here. But whenever you're creating, the default safe links policy as an example within here, you can select, in this case, the domains that you want to protect. Don't necessarily use users and groups unless you want to go more restrictive. But typically for SMB, it's not necessary in a lot of these cases. But the best practices here, uncheck this, let users click through the original URL. We don't ever want them to do that. Display the organization branding notification, I think, is helpful. Secure Score, wants you to not rewrite URLs. Do checks via safety links API only. They want this unchecked as part of that best recommendation. So does CIS as an example, but the rest of these can be turned on as an example. And you could create exclusions. Where I typically see this is where you have like an approved third-party VoIP solution that's sending you actual URLs for voicemail messages that you would have within there as well too. So a lot of great configurations there for this as well too that you can set up as part of that policy for safe links. And then on the flip side here, we'll get to some more of the conditional access policies. But the other thing that you want to make sure, especially as an MSP, that you come in and do within here as well, is you go into the settings for Defender, and you set up custom incident notifications, usually to go to your PSA. And you could call this whatever you like as well here, but you want to include the organization name, you want to include the tenant-specific portal link, and then you want to make sure you include, I like to include all these, but depending on the licensing, you only get access to some. Specifically, though, you can also get telemetry from Entra around the risky user detections potentially as well. And you're going to get a lot of noise if you do informational, but sometimes it's helpful because this also is inclusive of inbox rules as an example of that too. But in some cases, you might want to start with just low, medium, high as an examples of this as well too. So that's a great thing that not a lot of people, I think, either know about or configure, make sure they need to get configured. And this is where you would do your support at and your domain name as far as your third party, in this case, for your MSP, or your ticketing system, right? To be able to apply and push into there as well. So we think about the next phase, right? The user part of the attack chain here. The user then, if they get the email, it comes through, then they go ahead and click on a link as part of this as well. Then that is where you want to have some additional protections coming through. Some of this, you'll need to have as a prerequisite devices enrolled into Defender for Business or Defender for Endpoint, which again, you can get with Business Premium. But within here, if I go back to settings, one of the things that I like to configure as part of this for endpoints within here is web content filtering. And so this is basically saying, some of you are using third party for this, but it's your typical, hey, I can block adult content for this or things like that. But the ones I want to kind of double click on today is park domains and newly registered domains. This is a setting that you can configure that would help with, an attacker's just spun up a domain, or they have a park domain that they're using as part of their evil jinx infrastructure, as I just showed in that example as well too. And so that's, quite a lot, of protection there. Defender Smart Screen can also help with this as well too, if you have devices enrolled into Defender as part of that as well. And you can see some more of these settings here within there as well too, that you might want to make sure web content filtering is filtered to on here as part of that as well too. So that's a good helpful one, if they do click on the link, you got safe attachments, safe links that are doing detonation from a sandbox perspective to analyze that URL. Like the one that I just showed with Apollo Cyber, I've had that registered for over a year. And so it's not seen as potentially malicious, but it's also not a newly registered domain in that particular case as well. So this is helpful with this as well. And this is something that would, I see that question in the chat, would actually work with Chrome and Firefox as well to that point there. You need to have Defender devices enrolled as part of that too. So that's part of that phase of it, right? Like we're getting into, hey, they clicked on the link, and it's going and taking them to the web page. The next part of this, where they're actually signing into the man-in-the-middle page is where I feel like you have your strongest potential for protections. And this is where we can break this down for, that next phase, which is, hey, they've actually going through this workflow, they're getting their, credentials harvested potentially and getting that session token. And again, they don't even know anything's going on because they're redirected to the legitimate looking Microsoft page. This is the case where we, begin to look at conditional access policies to help prevent these types of incidents from occurring. So if I was to go into here and go into conditional access, I did a whole video on this last week on my channel, so I'm not going to be able to have enough time to cover all those policy recommendations, but I'm going to cover the ones and speak to the rest where I feel like you have the best protections in place. The most achievable one that I can, convey to you guys that most of us can go out and try to do is requiring a managed device for your ecosystem. So this is kind of a 101. If users can sign in from any device in any location, you should probably look at that first before looking at a man-in-the-middle workflow or protections, because that's really a prerequisite to doing this. But with this policy, you would include all users, and you would want to include, your emergency access account within here. I'm just going to include this admin user I have for testing purposes as an example within here. And then for your targeted resources, you would say all resources. And then for network, I'm not really going to configure anything for this policy. But within here, you can configure specific device platforms if you really wanted to. The use case for this is that you would have a separate policy for mobile, as an example, that you'd configure additional protections for, specific protections for. So this could be just, for Windows devices or Windows and Mac OS, or you could just do everything except for iOS and Android as an example. And then in the filter for devices section here, there's a couple ways that you can configure this policy. One of which is if you're running hybrid, then the particular use case here is you'd use a grant control, but require the device to be hybrid joined as an example within here to require access. And that's for all resources as an example. If you're running a more modern cloud first environment, the ways that you can do this here is to go back into the conditions, go into filter for devices, configure this, and then within here, you can go in and say exclude these filtered devices, and I would say the trust type equals Microsoft Entra joined. You could also do trust type equals registered, right? So you could do both. If you have everybody joined, that's usually the best practice. And you can say or right here instead. They handle both types of these that are coming through. And then instead of saying we're going to use a grant control, we're just going to block access instead, right? So that's just basically saying if you're not using a hybrid joined device if you're not using a Entra joined device or registered device, then we're not going to allow access within there. If I go ahead and turn this policy on and click create, and now if I go, this might take a minute to propagate, but we'll try to do it on the fly because I like to show you guys. This usually is pretty fast from a propagation perspective. But if we go back to our evil Jinx server and we re-grab this URL that we saw there and we copy this and we go back to this user and we try to paste that in here. Let me just re-sign back in with the account here. Just go to an incognito window and I'll grab those credentials again. Same guy that we're going to use here to try to sign in. So this will be Alan. And again, I may have to be patient for propagation of that policy, but we'll see. It should be pretty fast. All right. So we got this message that says your signing is successful, but doesn't meet the criteria to access resource, right? So this is preventing the initial token harvesting. And in Evil Jinx, the downside, like their password is still harvested here, but we didn't actually get a session token to be able to overcome MFA in this particular case. So that, in my opinion, again, this policy for requiring a managed device is probably, the most achievable to most of us because we have our devices managed and we should be locking that down as a best practice to begin with, versus some of these other more complex policies that you could get into as well. So I think, that one's one of the easiest ones, again, to get closest to implementing to prevent this altogether. You do have to be conscientious, though, that, this is going to be harvested. So, best practice would be, if you don't get an alert in Microsoft or anything like that, it is hard to scale and understanding where you can actually get this information or telemetry or know that the password was harvested. But you could also look at, this is a prime benefit for going passwordless, right? Because if they're passwordless, they could still get the session token harvested if they were to walk through that without any of these protections, but the password wouldn't actually be harvested as well too. So it's really interesting, to get into that layer of it because you can go in and hunt over time. That's more advanced, I would say, in nature. But it's a good way, to try to detect for, unknown locations or suspicious IPs and things like that within the sign-in logs. Like I was showing earlier, where we have, if we go to the user sign-in logs here, again, if we're looking at all users, just skimming even on this user sign-ins that's interactive, I can see here that number one, this user, Alan, signed in from this Washington, Virginia location. We've got Broomfield, and then the rest of these sign-ins are all from Greenwood Village with a specific IP. So you can start to spot these within the sign-in logs within that experience. But that protection, on conditional access is definitely something that you can get into to start to lock things down. Again, I'll post a video that you can get into, which kind of goes through these protections, but I also have a blog post that I'll put in here as well that goes through these. Some of you guys are asking too. But this is kind of the workflow here. You could have a managed device. You could require a compliant device. There is ways to overcome this, but the other thing I talk about within here is that you can actually harvest the token in other methods, right? You can get people to go in and basically have cross-site scripting. You could get malware on a device. You could have a malicious browser extension where the token is harvested that way versus adversary in the middle, phishing. And we also want to prevent the back half of that, which is requiring, or having the actual replay event prevented as well too. And there's only a few policies, today that could support that. And they're more or less, I should say, less flexible in nature. Trusted location is a great example where if you have that, that actually would prevent a replay event as well too. They'll see a similar message that you saw when I instituted that protection for the managed device. Token protection is limited today. Not going to get into that fully because it's also a P2 feature that has only availability on client applications, meaning like the desktop client versus the browser. And then global secure access is Microsoft's new SASE ZTNA solution that allows for more flexibility, but also could prevent both token theft and token replay. So it's pretty powerful, and it is inclusive of Entropy 1. I talk about this in this article, so certainly could do a follow-up on more of these if it's of interest to you guys, but don't have enough time today to walk through all that. I think those are definitely the most powerful when we talk about the actual preventative nature of this type of an incident, right? And getting into these various factors with it as well. When we talk about post-breach mitigation in the kill chain and having other policies that you can use to prevent these other types of persistence techniques and things like that, we have some considerations that we can also get into. Registering of apps is typically, one of the common techniques here that an attacker will do. They'll go in and they'll register a third-party app, or they'll consent to a legitimate app that they can use to exfiltrate data, or basically keep persistence, send emails on behalf of users, things like that. Some common ones that we see in environments are, applications called EM client, Perfect Data, Cloud Sponge. Some of you may have experienced those in your environments, but they're typically used for those persistence techniques. And it's really helpful to come in here and lock things down. So this is a permission that's on by default, where you say, hey, users are allowed to consent to apps, which is really something Microsoft's changing most recently, last month. But you need to make sure that this is set to do not allow users to consent for this as well. And also in the admin consent workflow, you can set this up to go to specific users when they do need those for that, to flow into an approved workflow, which is also really good just to have approved applications on your network as well. The other, piece within here that you'll want to look at is looking at these applications over time just to make sure they're not configured for that. And under the user settings, you'll also make sure that this is turned off where users cannot register for applications, right? So this is a way where an attacker can stand up a whole brand new identity, have their own set of credentials. And so if the user's password is updated or reset, or, if the session token will run out of time, they have about an hour or longer, depending on your session times, that will, be alive and can be used. But that's where they want to, have these other methods that they use for persistence as well too. So those are some interesting topics, for that persistence technique. The other things that you want to lock down that I typically do here is under conditional access. You would create a policy to require MFA require MFA to register second factor. So this is basically something where, attacker has access to that user environment. They could easily go to the security profile of that user and update their, phone number they have on file, or add a new Microsoft Authenticator method. They have their password. So they might want to maintain persistence by having their own MFA prompt that they could use to persist. So you might want to include all users on this, and you might want to say that the user actions, in this case, it could be also the register or join devices, but it could also just be this register security information. And within here, you want to go ahead and say you grant that, but you require multi-factor. Now, the obvious caveat here is like first-time registrants, right? For users that are onboarding to the organization. The prerequisite with this is that you would need a temporary access pass, right? For users that are onboarding as part of a process flow. So this is one where it's like later down the line, there's some protections you can put into place immediately that are more binary, like that users can't register for apps. And then there's going to be others here that you want to do over time where you have a good process behind it and can enforce this. Because this would prevent you from having to look up in a post-breach incident. Did they change the MFA methods? Did they register any new MFA methods through the audit logs? So on that note too, just as a call out, I'll share this link into the article too, and I created a whole video on this, but there's a whole other side of this, which is incident response. And that would actually just be, you reacting to these types of incidents and best practice around there, which is some of the stuff I covered today. But when this is, when you get this posture management into place, a majority of these steps go away, which is really the thesis, right? Or where we all want to head is getting around posture management and not being stuck in the reactive state of getting alerts, getting a phone call because, somebody's clicked on a link and is now compromised, right? So these are the things that we're trying to solve for with the posture that we see within here as well too. On the other aspect of this, we talk about inbox manipulation rules. We have some of those alerts that we set up initially to get alerted on that. And it's really, you can't lock that down super heavily because the organization will flog at you in a lot of cases. You could turn it off altogether, but most organizations can't support that for those. So it's just something that you want to monitor as part of this as well. And obviously turn off things like inbox rules that auto forward is a great example, or auto forward to external domains as part of that. And then there's, some other factors that relate back to this mapping here that we talked about that get into more of the common restrictions. I think though, again, the protections that you see here as part of these are really around the conditional access policies that can really begin to lock things down. Things like phishing resistant MFA is hard to get to in a lot of client environments because of the user experience. But something like managed devices, again, is a lot less friction and more commonplace today. That's a great win to start. But I would try to move closer and closer to, these more enhanced protections. Even global secure access, as an example, you can get Microsoft traffic directed with just P1 instead of having to buy the entire interest suite. So something I could do a whole breakdown on in a different video. But a lot of the, the post-breach incidents and automated response is where you start to get into, this is only available in P2 or E5, right? As part of that. But it doesn't inhibit you from preventing the incident altogether. So I just wanted to make that a little bit more well-known because of, the various factors within there that you might want to take a look at. But these are some unique considerations with that as well. And then as we're kind of coming down on time, and I want to leave enough time for more Q&A, I know there's been a lot of questions and dialogue in the chat I haven't been able to keep up with. So I want to make sure I get to everybody's questions within there too. But one of the things that, when we talk about assessing a client tenant or explaining risk to customers, I'll share this with you guys as well too, but one of the things that you want to begin to talk about is risk. And I think that this is probably from a volume perspective where we see a lot of identity compromise and where you'd want to have, kind of a basic checklist of assessing their risk and explaining that to them based off of existing posture and existing practices today. So I'll share this with you guys, but effectively this is, a way that you can look at a basic questionnaire, if you will, that has a progression of 1 to 3 and has a severity of low to high. And then from a findings perspective, it's got 3 selections: not covered, partially covered, or covered. Partially could be, you've got MFA coverage on certain users, but not everybody's covered, as an example of that. And this is a way for you to score a tenant quickly and just showcase to, a customer, hey, you're really high risk for identity compromise because you don't have these basic things in place. Most specifically, obviously there's your 101 items like MFA being enforced for all users, but also if users can sign in from any device in any location, it's a pretty high risk, in my opinion, for the existing landscape that we have today. And then the rest of these are revolving around email protections because that's the, one of the highest attack vectors that we see. I'm not saying this is all inclusive by any means of the attacks you'll see or the communication, but I think it just transposes this into a way that you can quickly have a conversation with your customers around the need to do an uplift, for identity protection based off the risk within their environment. So I'll certainly share that out with you guys. But the last thing I wanted to showcase to you guys today, didn't want to make this a product demo by any means for what we're covering, but one of the things that we do in CloudCapsule is analyze the tenant security and posture. And we do have an entire token theft playbook that basically takes what I just, kind of walked you through and does these automated checks for the things that you'd want to see within the tenant, including, looking for risky users, inbox rules, suspicious apps, and kind of list those out, but also talks about what does your posture look like? Do you have these postures in place to kind of prevent the attack from occurring, but then also thinking about the upgrade path, from a licensing perspective. So just want to showcase that in case you guys are interested. If any of you guys, like, we're running a promotion as part of this webinar, if you wanted to sign up for CloudCapsule on the Essentials model, which is our base model, we would include the token theft playbook as part of that. So those are, just some components here that we're looking at to help you automate it, just recognizing the scale and time that it would take to assess these tenants one by one, but then also, progress them over time too, where some of this is going to take time because of the end user impact to implement as well. So with that, wanted to turn it over actually really to Q&A for the last 10 minutes that we've got here, just to make sure I can cover everybody's questions and kind of go through some of that. So feel free to keep posting as we keep going through these, but I'll start to walk through these. Do additional conditional access policies require enter join devices pick up this type of token theft sign-in? Yes, that I think, Alex, you probably asked that before I started showing that demo, but they do. So the require enter join devices is definitely one that you can get into there, to get into that. That one, again, as an asterisk, again, you have to think about the process definition of net new device on board, where it's not already going to be device joined. So you got to create a way to flow through that and have that device as part of that as well too. But then you can get into some of these other factors here, which goes into some of those other components as well too. All right. We will provide the recording for sure. Hopefully there's a way to do conditional access to block this. Yeah, there's multiple, conditional access policies like I was showing there, and having that linked article that you can use with just BP. The token theft specific protection is definitely just in P2 today, but also has its own restrictions because it's in preview. So that's another one that, you would want to have as part of that. Recommend either paying for YubiKey for each user to protect logins, or buying an E5 add-on using protections from that. I certainly think, that's a much heavier investment, and also you're going to have a lot of end user friction, and you also have to deal with the overhead of when a user loses the YubiKey, which is inevitable. So there's a lot of upfront cost on both the labor and the actual YubiKeys themselves, because they're on average like $50 to buy. So I think with some of those other protections that I was showcasing there, it's a lot more lightweight that you can get into as well for that, which is thinking about requiring compliant devices, requiring, the managed devices, thinking about trusted locations, thinking about GSA, our SASE solution as part of that as well too. And that's another one where You could buy the E5 add-on, and get a lot of the security protections like the automated attack disruption, I think was mentioned, which is one of the most powerful functions as part of that. And just kind of pulling that together. So this product similar to Simperis Ensure ID DSP. I'm not sure what that product is, but I'll look it up and try to answer you after there too. Isn't blocking legacy Ethereum protocol still required since they bypass? Yeah, you still want to have that blocking legacy authentication protocol within there as well too, because it bypasses MFA altogether, with legacy access. So definitely another conditional access policy that's a default baseline. What do you do for a user that does not want to use a hardware token or their phone for MFA? So within there, with the alternatives, I would say that exist there for a hardware token or their phone, there's going to be kind of a limited some comments there about firing them, but if you can't do that, then you might want to look at obviously like there's not a whole lot of other options and they're less secure. Like if they said, hey, I want to use SMS, or I want that they have a YubiKey that they could use. Windows Hello for Business is probably the best phishing resistant method today that causes the least amount of friction because they're familiar with it from their iPhone or Android experiences. But it has its own support burden that I've seen where people get confused about what the PIN is and if it's their password, and you get a bunch of use cases like that you'd have to get into as well. So don't necessarily have a great answer. I think that's one of those use cases where it's like, you've got limited options for this that also, have the security back behind it. Next question here. How are you handling new device onboards with CAP control in place for requiring device enrollment on all apps? TAP. Yeah, I would say temporary access pass is your best method there. That fits in really nicely because what I've posted other videos about too, when you think about approved approved device inventory, right? You're actually having a approved process for how a device onboards to the network. When you talk about that, and the temporary access pass is getting your team engaged, actually generate that, should be for one-time use to actually enroll the device, and it goes through an approved work stream to do so, and then follow CIS standards, in a lot of cases there too, to have the approved device going through the network. So pretty powerful, but also a great way to control that and also make sure that attackers can't go in and just register a device after they compromise the user if they were able to harvest that token as well. So let me see. What about third-party tools that can do what BP does, saving the cost? I think it's an interesting point, right? I think the third-party tools is an interesting concept because there's hidden cost in overhead versus native integration. There is, certain considerations where they might be doing more, like what I see of the proliferation of today is through the reactive alerting concepts of there versus the, the actual nature of prevention. Because conditional access, it's going to be one of your forefront components that is going to prevent a lot of this to begin with, and what you should really focus your time on. But not saying that third-party tools can't do similar. I just worry about, like, is that actually saving me money because I have to pop into two different tools or manage two different systems? Let's see. So question about phishing protection system via branding CIS prevent evil jinx. It used to, but now attackers have overcome that and they can replicate the same CSS. So it doesn't work. I know we've had some solutions come out from Huntress and Kelvin from CIPP around that in the past that kind of has a workaround. I think somebody mentioned that there too. Yeah, some interesting dialogue going on and reading back on all the comments. Question about COPE devices rather than company devices rather than BYOD for a Microsoft Authenticator app. I wouldn't necessarily say that for just like using Authenticator. Myself as part of that, I think that's fine, but I think you want to have your own protections if they're logging into applications on their Word or on their mobile device as part of that. For BYOD, I still think you want them, if you're supporting BYOD in personal devices, you still want them enrolled into a solution like Intune so that you can enforce device compliance and not just let any device in the world, again, enroll and, 200 versions behind on patching and whatever else might be on that device as an example with that. Thoughts on leveraging CIPP for remediation and policy management at scale? Yeah, I think, CIPP's got some great capabilities for standards, but what they call standards, which is posture management that you can push out into, one-to-many tenants. I think there's some limitations with it in the sense of like how much you can actually configure within the portal, but definitely allows you to scale out with some of these, shell policies you'd want to institute over time. Just got to be also obviously be conscientious about the end user impact, as well there too, just because of obviously like people might be signing in, and if you lock these things down, then yeah, screamer test, right? Yeah. So that's a great way to describe it. If you're getting that and you get a bunch of support tickets right away, it's probably not the best. Can you explain the difference between user settings, user can register apps, and enterprise apps consent do now allow user consent? Yeah. So I have actually a whole video on this too, but with the user settings, like registering an app registration within the portal allows you to say, hey, I can create this new identity and I can add whatever permissions that I want to it. Like I can read user profiles, I can send email, and I have my own secret that I'm able to use as part of that as well too, so that they can use that as a credential to perform other rights. And basically you want to prevent them from registering things. Common indicators of compromise, if we see that, is looking at, various factors that include, a dot, weird naming conventions, right? Weird reply URLs. We check for that in CloudCapsule. Whereas enterprise apps is like legitimate third-party tools that can be used maliciously. So that EM client, Cloud Sponge, they're pre-existing, but they can be used to create persistence, because once they register those apps, they can use, again, that identity to facilitate different actions like sending email on behalf of that user, accessing downstream applications and things like that as well too. So there's a lot of considerations with that, but kind of the high level difference there. And Dan, yeah, I know we're over time now, so I'm going to start to close things down, but Dan did post in the Q&A, I think in the chat here, I'll post it in here too. If you guys want to get a demo with us with CloudCapsule, feel free to sign up there. But hope you guys enjoyed that as well too. We're trying to do these every month. So I appreciate you guys joining. Next month, we'll do one on AI readiness and security behind that as well too. But again, appreciate all the engagement. This was awesome. I wish we had more time to go through all the questions, but try to follow up accordingly. And we'll see you guys in the next one. Appreciate it. Have a good rest of your week, guys.